Welcome to our podcast from the University of Maryland Autism Research Consortium. Today's podcast addresses perspectives on neurodivergent students' transitions from high school to higher ed or other ventures. In this first episode, we're going to talk with some specialists about many of the issues that you're thinking about. I am Nan Bernstein-Ratner. I am one of the co-directors of the UMARC here at the University of Maryland with Kathy Dow-Berger, who works with me to provide this type of podcast service to listeners. Today we're going to talk about a topic of tremendously large importance to many families. As children go through the educational system and they start to make plans to graduate from the educational system, they face what amounts to a service cliff. We are going to talk today about how we can increase our preparedness for the next stage of your child's life and gain a certain degree of greater peace of mind in knowing how to prepare your child or yourself for the next journey that you face in life. Our experts today, we have three of them. One of our panelists is Judith Bass. She is an internationally recognized expert in the field of college and post-secondary placement for students who learn differently. For the past 19 years, Ms. Bass has provided comprehensive planning services for students with autism, ADHD, and other learning differences. Ms. Bass is a contributing author to the recently published book, Navigating the Transition from High School to College for Students with Disabilities. She also serves as a consultant to several independent high schools in the Washington, D.C. area. Ms. Bass graduated from Stony Brook University with a degree in education and Hispanic languages and literature and earned a graduate-level certificate in college counseling from UCLA. She also holds the designation of Certified Educational Planner. Our next panelist is Rebecca Resnick. She is a licensed psychologist who specializes in neuropsychological assessment of children and adolescents. She's the founder of Rebecca Resnick and Associates, LLC, a private group practice with offices in North Bethesda and Rockville. Dr. Resnick earned her doctorate in psychology from the George Washington University and completed an internship in pediatric psychology and neuropsychology at Mount Washington Pediatric Hospital. Dr. Resnick also has a master's degree in special education with a concentration in learning disabilities. She served on the Maryland Psychological Association boards of directors for 6 years and was recognized for excellence in service to the association. Dr. Resnick has provided continuing education for psychologists at the national, state, and local level and enjoys conducting parent and teacher presentations. Our final panelist is Sarah Wayland. Dr. Wayland founded her company, Guiding Exceptional Parents, to help parents learn how to confidently and effectively help their children with ADHD, with autism, with learning disabilities, and other brain-based differences at home, at school, and in the community. In addition to presenting workshops, teaching classes designed to help parents, and working with individual clients, Sarah co-hosts the online Parenting Autism Summit and co-edited the book Technology Tools for Students with Autism. She's written articles for Parenting ADHD and Autism, the 2E newsletter, Washington Parent Magazine, and the Gifted Homeschoolers Forum, among others. You can learn more about her at guidingexceptionalparents.com, and I will say that you can contact all of our presenters using the information provided at the very end of this podcast slideshow. What we've decided to do today is to orient our podcast around the most frequently asked questions that our panelists usually encounter, as well as to invite them to contribute nuggets of information or wisdom that they feel that most families could profit from learning. And so we will go down some of those frequently asked questions first. As each of our experts provides some information to the listener, she is going to identify herself to help you understand which expert is providing which opinion. The first question that our panelists often hear is, what is the difference between a diploma and a certificate program in high school as we get to what amounts to the tail end of the educational system for many of our children? What are the pros and cons of each? What is the difference between the diploma and the certificate program, and what are the pros and cons of each? And who would like to go first on that? Sarah?
So this is Sarah Wayland. I think there are sort of two parts to that question. So one is what you can do with the diploma or certificate after you graduate, and the other is the programming that you end up getting when you are on either of those tracks. You're not supposed to really say that, but it's just true that the reality of educating people who are on the different tracks is different, and so the kinds of classes they take and the experiences they get are different. So people who are on a diploma track graduate with a high school diploma. Many opportunities after high school require that you have a high school diploma, and so you have to show that you're worthy of a diploma. So depending on the state that you're in, there are different requirements regarding what that means to have a high school diploma. But generally it means you have mastery over some core set of things, including reading, writing, arithmetic, science, social studies, things like that.
What's known these days as the core curriculum, right?
Right.
Yes.
Well, and actually Maryland is bowing out of the core curriculum. So, but anyway, so diploma track just tells people post high school that you have been able to pass either tests or classes or do a project that shows that you have mastered that content. A certificate, at least here in Maryland, is called a certificate of attendance, and it basically just says that you attended school through, the end of your time there. People can get certificates. There's graduation ages that are different. So typically, people on a diploma track aim to graduate by 18. After 4 years of high school. People on the certificate track often take a little longer. You can graduate with a diploma if you take a little longer, so that's possible. It doesn't happen a lot, but it is definitely possible. You can stay in school until you're 21. The certificate programs are typically for people who have intellectual disabilities, so there's some notion that they may not be able to master the content at the level required to earn a diploma. And so a lot of times people in the certificate track will also get a lot of training on they call it life skills, community-based instruction. There's all sorts of different names for it, but things like just how to cook, how to clean your apartment, how to how to live, and so on. So those are really different kinds of tracks. I honestly think everyone would benefit from the training people in the certificate track get, but we don't get those.
So Rebecca, you wanted to add something.
I did, and this is Rebecca, the psychologist and former special ed teacher. So when I think about diploma versus certificate, with the diploma, as Sarah so eloquently said, you're completing a certain course of study. And so students now, to get their high school diploma, have to complete all of the courses required for graduation. If you want an individualized program as opposed to the one-size-fits-all, then you can select a certificate track. And I wanted to broaden the concept of what a certificate is in people's minds. A lot of times, electing to pursue a certificate of completion is a grieving process. People feel like they're missing out and that it's not as good. One of the things I want to emphasize from the work that I've done is that a certificate program can be terrific. A lot of students may flounder along trying desperately to complete all of the required high school courses that may not either be useful or interesting to them. Remember, that's a one-size-fits-all neurotypical style path. For folks on certificate, they have the freedom to pursue what's actually interesting and useful to them because it's all designed to be individualized. So on a certificate program, for example, you may have the opportunity to develop some real-life career skills and skills that will allow you to live independently, travel all around, go to your work, get a job independently, do things like learn to pay your bills, which is really nice when you're an adult, and really prepare you for a fulfilling career. So yes, while a lot of students with intellectual disability will pursue a certificate program because they need to focus on those functional skills, a lot of other types of folks pursue a certificate program, not because they necessarily couldn't do all of the requirements of a high school diploma, but because it's right for them. And it's going to lead them down a path that will be maybe not the typical one, but one that can lead to a much higher quality of life.
Very good. And neither one of these should be confused with a GED, right? I mean, those are different. That is a different sort of thing, right?
GED is I believe,
It's just a high school equivalency diploma, right?
it's an equivalency diploma.
Right.
You have to take a test showing that you have mastered
Right.
certain.
Just to make it clear,
Content.
because some people talk about that as getting a certificate, but we're talking about
No.
a very different process
And,
here.
and I think it's important to mention that some post-secondary options require a high school diploma or a GED. And if you have a certificate, you have to go get some other thing showing that you can master the material.
So could you go from a certificate program to an educational opportunity that would later convey a diploma?
You certainly could. You could always try to earn your GED. It's harder than people think. When you get a certificate, it doesn't mean that you're going to be locked out of higher education forever. You could certainly pursue a degree, get some credits at a community college, and then later on, again, once, as Sarah said, you sort of shown that you can master the curricular objectives at the post-secondary level, then the doors are open to you.
Okay, well, that leads, I think, rather naturally to a separate question that we had received some interest in, which is what types of testing or reports are important for children to have, students to have, before moving on to post-secondary education or other opportunities or situations? And how recent should these reports and evaluations be? I get a sense that Judy wants to answer this. No?
Okay, this is Judy.
Okay.
What's really important is having psychoeducational or neuropsychological testing, and it needs to be done within 3 years of applying to college. So we recommend that students wait until after they're 16 to get the adult norms. And I'll let Rebecca give a little more detail on that. But it's very important that either the school does the testing or private testing in order to apply to some of the comprehensive programs, because if you're applying to a special program, you need that documentation at the time of application, not just at the time you're accepted to the school.
Okay. And what types of testing and reports are we talking about?
So when a student is in high school, if your student is not neurotypical, some people like to say students with autism spectrum differences, some people proudly wear the label autism or autistic. I'll try to use both interchangeably. So as students are reaching the age of 14, the law starts to change. And instead of focusing on K through 12, after they're 14, what the transition support law dictates is that they have to start having a plan. And that plan for transition has to be data-based and outcome-oriented. And the data are, of course, school performance and their learning portfolio, their IEP goal progression, but also some psychological testing. And as someone who's been both a producer and a consumer of many psychological reports, not many are really focused as deeply as they need to be on transition and thinking really practically about how to ensure that this young person doesn't fall off the cliff. Mm-hmm. So fall off the cliff is a term that we hear because a lot of our young people with autism spectrum disorders are living in their parents' houses, isolated without any kind of meaningful work or social life. Playing Fortnite is not a meaningful life. We want so much better for our young people. A lot of these young people have very valuable skills and talents to contribute, but because their transition support plan really didn't build a bridge between K through 12 education and what comes next, a lot of families are are perplexed and overwhelmed by trying to help that young person transition. And so, unfortunately, we as professionals have been letting families down, and we need to do better. So that psych eval is really the key that's going to open doors for you post-transition. So for example, if you have a good psych eval that documents that your student qualifies for accommodations at work and school under the Americans with Disabilities Act, that's critical. You have to have an intellectual disability documented prior to the age of 18 if you're going to access SSI and Medicare and Medicaid services after graduation. You really want it to focus on identifying the strengths and weaknesses that will make your young person successful in the world of work. So a good testing report will talk about this person, for example, is very good at details, but maybe not so good at interacting with customers. This person gets very flustered under time constraints and so needs the type of work experience where they can solve problems at their own pace. Noticing those sorts of personal and soft skills details about a person is what makes a psych eval really very useful to a family as opposed to something that gets stuck in a file and is never looked at again.
And where will parents go to get these kinds of resources? Where do they get that kind of testing?
This is Judy. Most high schools throughout the country will provide psychoeducational testing through junior year. Some will stop sooner, but oftentimes you do need to go privately to a private licensed psychologist, neuropsychologist, to get the testing. And to complement what Dr. Resnick said, is that when you're looking at the world of college, you also want those strengths and weaknesses identified in terms of the classroom and in terms of social support. And I think it's very important for the parents to understand what that means, because the worst thing is finding that the student is capable of doing the academic work, but not recognizing that they may isolate themselves on the weekends in their dorm room, and that can be devastating. So for the parents to be aware of what is out there for them in addition to the academic piece is really crucial, and I think the report, should be very clear about that.
Yeah, this is just, I'm going to digitate the observation that as someone who was in charge of the disability support units on our campus for a while, one of the issues that we dealt with was the need for parents to get this kind of effective testing and recommended accommodations before any student who needs any of those things shows up on a college campus, because it's very difficult legally we are not obligated and find it almost impossible to give accommodations that can't be documented appropriately. And unfortunately, many institutions of higher education have the offices to make the accommodations, but they don't have the services to test for the accommodations. That needs to be done before students get to campus. Sarah, I know you wanted to say something.
Yeah, this is Sarah. I just wanted to mention that you can get SSI if you don't have an intellectual disability, so I just wanted to clarify that one small point.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But the paperwork does sound very, very important and needs to be in place, is what I'm hearing, well before a student starts the senior year. So any time between what I'm hearing here, between 14 and 16 is a good time, is what you're saying?
So some schools will test your senior year. This happened for my son, but they were very nice. So not all schools are so cooperative, and it is a stressor on available resources at the school.
And the adult norms start at 16 or even a little bit older, so we recommend waiting until 16 if possible.
16, okay.
And one thing I'll recommend to families is a lot of times when your child has been assessed over and over and over again, and it's frustrating for you, it's frustrating for the student, because our tests are designed for the most neurotypical of neurotypicals out there. You may be tempted to go along with the school team if they recommend waiving your child's right to be assessed every 3 years. So they may stick a piece of paper in front of your face and say, yeah, I see Sarah's agreeing with me, then say, we don't really need to collect any more data. We know what's going on. That's a big mistake when you're talking about planning for transition, because again, if you don't have that magic piece of paper and then you're trying to advocate for your young person or they're trying to advocate for themselves in these huge bureaucracies trying to get things like vocational rehabilitation services, they're out of luck. So it's really important not to waive that right, even if you just dread sitting through yet another psychologist talking about all the things your child can't do. The information is incredibly valuable.
And if the listeners could see all the heads nodding around the table, because each one of us has had some experience with kids, our own kids, being responded to that way. And so I empathize completely that it is not fun to take your kid for more testing, but boy, is it necessary to do at some points. This next question, I know, really lights a passion in everybody's experience, and it's knowing whether or not pursuing higher education is really right for your child or your student. And I think probably each of you has opinions on this, and Judy's going to go first.
Okay. Knowing whether to pursue higher ed is a very difficult decision for parents. All parents want their children to follow what they consider the traditional path. But today there is no traditional path. It's very unique to even what we might call neurotypical students, although we're finding that there is no such thing truly anymore. And fortunately, there are wonderful options out there for students who need additional social support, who might be able to take 1 or 2 college classes, either for credit or not for credit, who might be able to live on a college campus in a special program for students with intellectual disabilities, but have that college experience, and also for students who might need some transitioning into a 4-year college. But there's no harm in researching all of these different options when you're looking at colleges. And there are some wonderful life skills programs that connect with college. There are some that connect with vocational training. And there's every level for every ability out there today. So for your child to be able to develop into an independent young adult, which is our goal for everyone, there are many paths to do that.
What I hear you saying is that the question is not whether pursuing higher education is right, but that too many of us have the notion that higher ed only means a traditional 4-year college.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That the statistics show that there's not such a high graduation rate, and a lot of students are not successful, more because they're not in the right academic environment, not because they're not capable. Mm-hmm. That's, to me, more important to deal with the social emotional piece, because the academic piece is either there or not there, but the social emotional piece really needs to be carefully tended to.
Yeah. Sarah?
This is Sarah. I just wanted to say, too, that there are lots of ways to live a life, right? So college is one way to live a life, and there are lots of other ways to live a life. And you can have a meaningful, wonderful existence without going to college, or if you drop out of college, there are lots of jobs out there for people who did not go to college that people really enjoy. And especially for people who are doers, so they want to do things. There's a lot of great careers out there, and one of the things that's been, I think, a shame in high school education is we've sort of lost the vocational technical track. I think a lot of kids would really benefit from exposure to that, because there are some wonderful careers out there that really have more of an apprenticeship model, which works better for a lot of people. So I was speaking earlier about the fact that I looked at the U.S. Census results, and I think 34% of adults have a college degree in the United States, and I can't remember what year that was, but it was like 2017 or something. And so that means that 66% of people do not,
Right.
and most people are gainfully employed. Our unemployment rate is not 66%.
No,
So
it's very low. Yeah.
Right.
And just on a fairly colloquial basis, I know that some of the people that I hire for various jobs either at work or around my house who work on apprenticeship models like electricians and plumbers have often expressed to me the difficulty that they're having in finding apprentices to train so that someday when they want to retire, there will still be somebody to do the work that they do and that they have pride in doing. I guess maybe at some point we could discuss how, if your own school doesn't provide such services, doesn't provide those tracks anymore, how do parents even identify where to go or how to help their children to find these options? Do you know, Rebecca?
Most school systems will have some sort of career training program. And I'm going to push back a little bit on the term higher education. It makes it sound like college is like the most wonderful thing
Right.
ever. And for a lot of students, spending 4 years of their lives studying things that, again, are not particularly useful and not particularly interesting. I'm a UM graduate, and a lot of my classes were not particularly useful, interesting, sure, but I only used the information from my entomology class when my kids got head lice. So there you go. We tend to, in the world of education, and when I was a special education teacher, we really want kids to achieve as much as they can. And for a lot of us, our own values lead us to steer children towards a diploma and college track, because that's our idea of what success is. But for a lot of my students, when I was teaching, they were pretty miserable taking the standard, program. So anyone here want to take Algebra 2 again? I certainly don't. A lot of kids were just miserable, and they were taking it over and over and over again. The students whose parents were open to a career and technical and apprenticeship type of path, those students were often thrilled. There are many students out there who are doing incredible things, fixing things, really sophisticated computer program debugging. I worked with one young man who had a really artistic talent, and he's a sophisticated cake and confectionery artist now. There are many career preparation programs at your local community college as well. And so, again, the four-year college is not the right fit for everyone. Working with somebody like Judy and her company, she specializes in all sorts of outcomes for students. And it's not just about going to college. There's many other paths to happiness, as Sarah said.
This is Sarah. I just also wanted to mention that some high schools do have really interesting programs. So I have a friend who graduated from a local high school, and she did a culinary arts track, and now works as a pastry chef at the Ritz-Carlton. So she's, doing really well, and that was made possible by her high school's programming. So there, if you are working with the people at your high school, very often they know about things that are available that are not just, science, tech, STEM careers or whatever.
Is there aptitude testing to try and guesstimate these things, or do parents wind up really being decent judges of what they think their kids are good at or want to do?
I would say, unfortunately, many parents see their children as themselves, and so what they see their children being able to do is what they do. And that can be fine in some instances, but sometimes they have a completely different brain than their parents. So it's sometimes there are some strengths-based assessments, there's career assessments, there are all kinds of things to gear the students' artistic strengths or verbal strengths, things like that, and we can help them going in that right direction. And I would also like to say that a lot of students with autism also have executive functioning issues, and sometimes it's just maturity that needs to happen before they're ready for college. I work with a lot of young adults in their late 20s and even early 30s who either had a bad experience or never went to college and are now ready to go because they're feeling more independent and ready to take on a few college courses. And so again, there's no right path, and there's lots of ways to get where you're where you want to go. So if you do think that college is something you want, it doesn't have to be right now.
That's a really good place to segue into another question that we've been considering, which is what kinds of structured gap year or transition programs are available to students who look like perhaps they could go on to traditional, I'm going to use traditional higher ed, air quotes that you can't see, but not right now. It looks like they need that extra time, or they need some other training in order to really profit, let alone survive, on a more traditional higher ed campus.
And this is Judy. There are a few gap year programs, and there are also programs that we call transition programs. So again, depending on the goal, there's a wonderful program here in DC called Bright Futures.
Broad Futures.
Broad Futures. Sorry about that. Broad Futures, that students can live at home and do an internship for the year. And so that's one example. There are other examples similar to that where students can go away and live in a structured living environment where they get daily support and classes in socializing, in meal planning, in just living their lives, managing their money. And there are also programs on college campuses that are pre-college programs. There's a few colleges that have a transition year where students learn to be on college campuses, and they might take developmental courses, maybe 1 or 2 credit-bearing courses if they're capable, and then after that year they can reevaluate whether or not they're ready to go on to college. So there are a number of different ways to do that. And again, taking a gap year doesn't mean you have to go on to college, or doing a transition year could be a transition to work, because you might not be independent enough to even work yet.
And that brings us actually, well, Sarah, before we get to other alternatives, you wanted to mention something.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that Department of Rehabilitative Services has a lot of transition programming that you can access. And they have really good programs that give your kids work experience, coaching, all sorts of, self-advocacy training, just lots of really good training that will help make you a better employee. Really great resource available to people who have kids with IEPs.
Just to add on to that, because Sarah brought up an excellent point. So what she's talking about is often called DOORS or DARS, depending on where you live. So that's through the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. This is your tax dollars at work. And what parents don't often know is that if you are going to have trouble getting independent employment after you graduate from school, you can have someone from Voc Rehab come to your IEP meeting. You can actually have the transition support teacher connect you up with Voc Rehab, and you can have your psychologist write the report specifically mentioning that you're going to need Voc Rehab services. So that's something a lot of parents don't know about.
And they are off. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
We get excited.
Yes,
Yes.
no,
No, I
that's
am.
the point.
Yeah, no, and they are really great. Like both my kids work with the DOORS counselor, and the services they provide are really, really helpful. And having them come to your meeting is really good because they can coordinate with the school team to figure out what parts the school's going to cover and what parts DOORS is going to cover. But as a parent, you have to be pretty on it to take advantage of what's offered. It's with DOORS, you have to do the initiating. So in schools, they just kind of provide it for you, but with DOORS, you have to find out what the classes are and sign up for it. They don't just hand it to you on a silver platter.
So DOORS is sounds like it's operating at both the pre and post-secondary level, the way you're describing it, because they get involved with you as your child is in secondary education to help with the transition.
Well, they're really about post-secondary, but the idea is to create a bridge, you not fall off the cliff.
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah.
getting them involved earlier rather than later is good.
Are there alternatives to something like DOORS, and do we have models for these kinds of resources on a more nationwide scale? So if we have listeners who manage to come to us from California or something like that, I mean, is this something that most states have an equivalency for?
Doors.
For doors, yes. That's national. Again, that's your tax dollars at work. And it's out there to support anyone with some sort of disability or difference, whether it's mental health, a developmental disability, a physical disability. It's there for anyone who's having trouble getting and keeping gainful employment independently. That's why it's there. And there's one program I think we are all fans of, which is the College Living Experience, which is known in our area, but it's certainly not the only one like it. There are hybrid programs, as Judy mentioned, where you have programs where they're teaching executive functioning skills and how to be independent in the community with a dash of academics as well. But most of the young people who are having trouble getting employment, who need, like voc rehab or college living experience, are struggling not because of their intellectual issues, but because of the soft skills, the people skills that are so make or break in the world of work.
And do we think that parents are thinking about that enough? I mean, it brings up a question if you're going to try and imagine where your student goes after graduation to a traditional school or to even some alternative experience in living away from home or in training. What are some resources that both students and parents should be looking for on campuses or in environments that they're considering attending?
That's actually a really good question because there's a lot of misinformation that people pick up. Yes, by law, every college is required to provide accommodations, but the baseline is minimal. Most colleges, fortunately, do a lot more than what is required by law. You might have a college where the student is entitled to extended time, but there's no distraction-reduced setting to take that test. So you might be getting up after the class and going to the professor's office and then having to finish your test. So what parents should really do is look for always visit the Office of Disability Services at every program on every first visit, because if that's not comfortable to you, then the entire place isn't going to work. But also ask questions about the nature of the campus. Are the professors generally supportive of all different learning styles? Is the culture of the campus accepting of all learning styles? Sometimes you have a wonderful learning specialist in the disabilities office, but the administration might not support that person enough, and the students might have difficulty with their professors. Yes, it could work, but why put your child through something when there are thousands of schools out there, and there are many of them that will really support the student. There's executive functioning coaching you can ask about that students can come in once a week and meet with someone. There are all kinds of assistive technology programs available where the students learn how to use them. Some professors who the school links everyone together, and the professors can easily get in touch with the support services if they see a student's having a problem. But it's really about the culture of the campus that makes the difference. So yes, a student can get into college A because he got in by grades, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's the right place for him to go. And some of the colleges have excellent supports for social support.
I was just going to ask about that because so far I'm familiar with being at the professorial end of a lot of these things. It's one thing to be sure that the student does well in class assignments, but that's only part of what it takes to survive in a college.
Yes, and you need to look, and there's a handful, maybe a little more, of colleges that have excellent comprehensive social support programs. And I can just think of a few: Rochester Institute of Technology, Adelphi University, Curry College. I mean, there's a few that will support the student socially and make sure that they're not isolating in their dorm room over the weekends. And have to be careful, though, because there are many colleges that have excellent support, but only for specific learning disabilities, not for autism.
Interesting.
And so there's a distinction.
Okay. Other contributions to this?
It's an interesting, sorry, this is Rebecca, the psychologist. There's been an interesting shift in our country because back in the supposedly good old days, if you got a high school diploma and were a hard worker, you could expect to get the type of job where you could basically have a middle-class lifestyle, or even better if you could really hustle or work hard or be creative. What we run into now are situations where there's so much pressure on young people that we forget about a lot of the very important make or break skills, which is, again, the soft skills, the social skills, things like knowing that you can't sit in your dorm room all weekend, as Judy said, that you have to exercise and take care of yourself and pay your bills. So as we have more young people where we don't want them just living in their parents' basements, preferably not like smoking pot and watching cartoons, we really want everyone to have a high quality of life, and we are no longer allowing people to be written off in the same way in this country that we used to. So people with disabilities, now there are more and more services out there and more creative programs so that everybody can have a seat at the table.
Yes, Judy.
And that reminds me, too, there's an excellent book and website, Think College, for students with intellectual disabilities, where they can have the college experience and be learning a vocation at the same time. So that's another avenue for parents to research.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Sarah?
I'm hoping this is on topic. It's not necessarily about resources students should look for, but you asked the question, what should parents be thinking about when they send their child off to college? And one thing I see a lot is parents who press really hard to get their kids through the diploma track, and they neglect a lot of these important skills. So they push super hard, get lots of accommodations. They themselves provide a ton of support for their kids, and then the kids graduate and they do not have executive functioning skills. They don't know how to make their bed. They don't shower regularly. They don't remember to brush their teeth. They don't know how to break big assignments down into small pieces. They don't know a lot of very important skills that they are going to need to succeed. And then they go off to college and they don't have it. And or they can't even handle that. So the stress of applying for college, very often the kids will say,
yeah, this is not for me. But
yes, and another issue that comes up is just being able to manage your own medication. So if you are on medications, filling prescriptions, picking them up, knowing to do that ahead of time. If it's a controlled substance, how are you going to get that, right? These are big issues, and these can have a huge impact on how students function in college.
Well, it almost sounds as though the parents are so concerned with college as the destination, as sort of the end of the road, that they may be neglecting the notion that college itself is the beginning of a process that is much more complicated than just applying someplace and getting accepted and packing your bags.
That is true, and I think that unfortunately society puts that pressure on families. We are trained to think that grades are the answer, and so the parents, for example, have a student who did really well through middle school and with his executive functioning issues hits a wall in 10th grade, and they panic. But then they focus on how to get the grades, not how to teach him the skills to get the grades. And so it becomes all about pushing the student to earn a grade, not how to learn to be independent. And it's not their fault because the media and everybody talks about how hard it is to get into college. The truth is it's not hard to get into college. If you're applying to the colleges that are right for you. There's 2,000 colleges out there. Everyone thinks of the top 5% as the only ones. And yet, students that I've worked with have incredibly successful college experiences. They get into most of the colleges they apply to or the programs because they're only looking at things that are appropriate for them. And parents need to be educated about starting that independence and self-advocacy training much earlier than worrying so much about grades. I'll tell them, too, that I would rather see a student earn a C that he earned himself in high school, because that's going to prepare him for college much better than the parent earning him the A.
Right, absolutely. And this has made a very nice transition into the whole discussion of considerations that we need to be considering in terms of transition. out of the traditional K through high school, K through 12 education and into adulthood. We've been mentioning a lot of these issues. We've mentioned the college supports, the testing, the seeing the college as the arrival of the next stage, but not the destination of everything up until now. What are things that we so far have not mentioned that may be relevant in looking to this transition? Rebecca?
So I'm Rebecca, the psychologist, but I'm going to put my special ed hat back on. We've been talking a lot about people on the autism spectrum who are sort of in that quasi-college preparedness zone, but maybe we should talk for a few minutes about the students for whom they know they're going to need a new path, a creative path, that there may be a square peg in a sea of round holes, and so they've got to carve out their own path for a high quality of life. So I want to speak just a moment to families. If you're not thinking of college, but you're thinking in terms of career success and quality of life and happiness and independence for your child, your transition goals and becoming connected with social services is absolutely critical. Again, you should start seeing transition planning take place, as determined by the law once a child is 14. After 14, if your child can participate in a meeting without becoming overwhelmed, they should be there, or someone should find a way to understand your young person's preferences, if there's any way that they can express those, or just, really taking the time to collect data on what this young person observes and what makes them feel calm and happy. Where are they successful in their school day and their career planning? But also thinking in terms of finding someone who can help you with the nuts and bolts. Where is your young person going to live after they live at home? How are you going to prepare financially? Are you going to create a trust? What kind of health insurance is this young person going to have? What kind of leisure and social activities? So the folks at school in K through 12 and of course K through 21, that is their job, is to help you think of those things so that you're not stuck trying to put it all together after you fall off that cliff.
And so is there a particular type of person or place to find information on transition legal issues that would otherwise be confusing to most people? Do you have recommendations for that?
Sure. There are professional advocates, and when you seek a professional advocate, you really want to seek someone who has some kind of credential and qualification. There are a lot of well-meaning people out there whose hearts are in the right place, but speaking as a former special educator, those folks don't always know how to advocate effectively or help you make wise decisions. And, of course, there are lawyers.
Yes, and we've had some of them on to talk about some of the legal and financial ramifications of being in a family with a special needs student.
I think you had my friend Matt Boggett on, and yes, those people are incredibly valuable for helping you understand that. Hopefully you don't need to get to the place where there's an attorney, but if you're having conflict with the school, at least talking with an attorney sooner rather than later is very wise. And I see Sarah nodding, so maybe I'll let you pick up the rest of that.
Well, that's absolutely true. I think sometimes in the interest of maintaining happiness, we don't call in people to help us, figure out what's important for our kid and make sure we're advocating for the right things soon enough. The other thing I wanted to say is people like Matthew Boggin can help you figure out how to plan. I mean, they really know the financial side of things. And I wanted to mention something that people don't really talk about, but when you have been parenting a child with disabilities for a long time, you get tired. So, when your kid is young, you think, I'm going to do this, I'm going to change the world, I'm going to have this kid, and we're going to do whatever is necessary. And you get to the end of high school and you're just done. And so I think it's really important to remember and plan for the fact that you are going to get tired. And what are you going to do at that point when you can no longer do as much as you've been doing? I think we really need to think about this.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very important consideration. I just want to put in another plug for Matthew and other people that we've had on our podcast that are still available at the site that this podcast is posted, for parents and families to look at some of the complexities that face them, including burnout, which is a really legitimate problem. Yes, and Judy wants to add something to that.
I'd like to, a couple of things. One is I erroneously mentioned Curry College as one for students with social support. They have excellent support for students with specific learning disabilities and executive functioning. So I will give you a different one. Mercyhurst University in Pennsylvania has an excellent program. So there. The other thing I wanted to mention is the other end of the spectrum, literally, are the twice exceptional students with autism.
Yes.
Just because a student is brilliant and is capable of going to a school like MIT does not mean it's necessarily the right school. We don't need to strive to get to the top. Students need to look where they're going to be comfortable in the middle 50th percentile, the middle range of accepted students, so that they can have a balance. And most people think about the hardest school they can get into. And maybe that's fine for some students who can rise to the occasion. But for most of these students, they already have perfectionism, anxiety, and all kinds of other things. They're going to get an excellent education, even if they're near the top academically. And that's an important consideration.
We have a lot of those students here at Maryland in our Cigna program who are excellent majors in our most competitive subject areas, but they do need that support to be happy, mainly because otherwise they can satisfy some of the classroom endeavors, but they won't come out of here very well-rounded or happy individuals. Yes, Sarah?
So another thing I wanted to mention is that students themselves feel societal pressure. So they feel like they're supposed to go on to college. They feel like they're supposed to, basically go to college. That's really presented as the only option. And they feel like if they make a different choice, that somehow that makes them unworthy. And so that societal pressure that they get, and maybe pressure from their parents, pressure from peers, pressure from teachers, that's a very real consideration that they are looking at that. So I have a friend whose son is at Dynamy, which is one of these transition programs. And he is the only person he was in one of these magnet programs, and he was the only person in his school who didn't go on to college. And he felt really weird about that. And he had a hard time explaining to his friends what he was doing. He got into RIT, actually. And, he's going to go there afterwards. But right now, he really felt he needed a year of transition. But he had a hard time explaining that decision to his friends.
Yeah, I think none of us would choose to be adolescents all over again. So we do understand the pressures are in all of the students, and particularly heartfelt, I think, in some of these students who face different challenges. I wanted to maybe shift gears as we get to the end of our time and come to each of you and sort of say, given your experiences both on a personal level and as professionals in what you do every day, what are the one or two nuggets of advice or information that you might want to convey that we just haven't had? I mean, we could talk here for weeks, right? And we probably would never empty out all of the things that we find important for families to know. But maybe we could go through one by one and ask for one or two major insights that you've gained over the years, either personally or professionally, that you'd want to share with the listeners. Do we want to start with you, Sarah?
Okay, so I have two.
Okay.
I'm sticking to two because I have about a bazillion.
They can always write you separately for the rest of the list.
Yeah, the bazillion list. So one thing that Judy brought up earlier was the executive functioning piece. It is a big deal. It is a really big deal.
Do we want to remind parents what executive functions are, just in case? We're professionals. We throw jargon around. What are we talking about?
Well, oh gosh. So there are lists that are as few as 7 executive functions. I've seen as many as 12, so I'm just going to rattle off a few of them. Planning and organization is one most people are familiar with. Shifting from one task to another. Initiation, getting started on a task. Self-monitoring, so knowing how you're doing in your progress on a task. Organization of materials, so,
I just thought we would get
together.
That started. Okay, so
Yeah,
the executive function piece is big. We just want to be sure that all listeners have any idea what we're talking about.
Yeah, so it's I think that a lot of people have problems with those executive functions, and they get a lot of support from the schools, a lot of support, and their parents, frankly. And when they go to college, like, that support is not there. Even in fabulous schools that provide a lot of coaching, they have to take advantage of the coaching and they have to be able to do it. So if you're a person who is struggling with executive functioning, you really need to think hard about how you're going to deal with that when you're at college. And you could go away to school and have one of these places that Judy was talking about that provide the supports, but you have to go get the supports, which, by the way, is an executive function. So you know, it might be that living at home is a good option, and you still have people who can provide them. Actually, through SSI, if you have SSI or DOORS, you can get funding to hire somebody to help you with executive functioning. So there are lots of creative ways to deal with that, but you need to face that head on. It is a big, big deal. The second thing is you can always change your mind, right? So if you tried something and it didn't work, there are always a lot of other options, and it doesn't mean you failed. I always call it data collection. Okay, you have more data, and so now you know what worked, what didn't work, so let's find something else now that we have more data.
I think that's a wonderful life lesson for all of us, frankly. Okay.
And I would say, as a parent, having gone through a lot of this myself, we all do the best we can as parents. We learn as we go. We all make mistakes. And the best advice is to educate yourself as best as you can and then move forward from there.
Sounds good, Judy. Thank you.
So, Rebecca, the psychologist, one of the things that I think is most important is to build your village, find the people who really get your child and your family and what's right for you, not what's going to impress the neighbors, but what's going to lead to a happy life for your child, and one that you can manage without working your fingers to the bone and wearing yourself out to the point that you have nothing left to give, and your relationship with everyone else in your life except that child is strained or even gone by the time they're up in the high school level. When you build your village, it is so important to find people who have the appropriate credentials, who you can really trust. Again, there's a lot of well-meaning people out there, but you want someone who's put in the work to really learn. And maybe that's life experience, maybe it's having done a ton of research. Personally, I went through years of humiliation to get my credentials, and that humiliation made me a better provider who doesn't screw up as much, hopefully. Yeah. The other piece that I would say is to really familiarize yourself with special education law. And if you're having trouble understanding it, there are a lot of resources out there. Get yourself an advocate. There are a lot of pro bono legal services in every community. There will be one. Might be a long waiting list, but they're out there. If you can consult an attorney, if you have the resources, or find someone who will see you sliding scale or pro bono, do that sooner rather than later. And for goodness sake, read your procedural rights and safeguards brochure. That's the one they give you in the meeting, and you're so stressed out, you put it right in the folder and you forget about it. You probably have like 10 copies at home. You have to understand that. And I'll let you in on a little secret. A lot of people in your multidisciplinary team won't know all the material in that booklet. That booklet is what's going to make sure that your child gets everything he or she needs and that the school is serving your child in compliance with the law. You want to know sooner rather than later if your child's not being served appropriately.
Yeah, I think a lot of us look at those booklets and it's like the warranty written in a foreign language. And so we shove it in the drawer and we don't come back to it, unfortunately, until something's really wrong.
Yeah, it is written in a foreign language. It's legalese. It's not the way we talk to each other, and so you can read it, but do you really understand it to the point where you can act on it? If you can't, if it's just confusing to you, there's tons of experts out there. Find someone who can help you. Don't try to go it alone.
Yeah, I agree. Sarah?
I did want to mention, as far as resources go, every state has a parent training and information center, and they can help you with interpreting the legalese, and they provide their services for free. So
that's
a
wonderful
really good
website.
resource.
It used to be called the Nietzsche Newsletter. What's it called now? PEATC?
Well, it's actually part of IDEA that there are these, and every state has a different one. And so I would just search for Parent Training Information Center and then your state name, and it'll pop up.
Yeah, it's nice because you can actually search for chunks of the law, depending on what you're looking for. So if you punched in transition, you can find the actual pieces of the law, but then you can also find the translation where they tell you what it actually means.
Yes, the interpretation rather than the translation, perhaps. Well, we're probably going to end on that note. I want to call attention to the podcast listeners, number one, before talking about what we'll do next, since we've mentioned a lot of the other podcasts in which we've talked about legal matters and financial matters, so people might want to go back and look at those if they have not heard those podcasts in the past. Our next panel is actually going to have perspectives from private and public school educators as opposed to the current panel of wonderful experts who helped us out today. It will be available in the last week of this month, the last week of September 2019. As we end this discussion, it's really not meant to be completely ended. If you have questions or have suggestions for upcoming podcasts, please do contact us, the University of Maryland Autism Research Consortium. We're easy enough to find at autism@umd.edu, and our phone number is listed on the slide there. You can Google us pretty easily, UMark at UMD. And our three experts for today, again, they were Judith Bass, Rebecca Resnick, and Sarah Wayland, and their emails are available to you in case you want to follow up on any of the information that they presented that was not clear. Actually, those are their websites, not their emails. But I am positive that their emails are on their websites. So if anybody listening to this podcast needs extra information, we look forward always to hearing from you. And again, we're always looking for ideas for upcoming podcasts to better help you and your family. So thank you very much, everybody, for today. And we will talk to you next time on our next podcast. Take care.